He thought his power would protect him. He thought no one would dare challenge him. But when Pam Bondi exposed his secret deals, his reign came to a crashing end. Pam Bondi had faced tough cases before. For as Florida's former Attorney General, she had taken on corrupt politicians, drug cartels and high-profile criminals who thought they were untouchable. But this was different. She sat at her desk, flipping through the thick file in front of her. Pages of financial records, deposition transcripts and sworn affidavits. The deeper she read we in bed, the worse it got. A judge, someone who had sworn an oath to uphold justice, was at the center of it all. Judge Robert Kinsey, a man who had sat on the bench for over 2 decades, presiding over cases that shaped the lives of thousands. His record was spotless, his reputation sterling, at least on paper. But Bondi knew better than to trust appearances. Across from her, Kyle Donahue, her client, sat stiffly in his chair. A former clerk at the courthouse. He had uncovered something most people would have buried and walked away from. But not Kyle. He had come forward with what he knew, even at the cost of his career in personal safety. You telling me Kinsey fixed cases for years, and no one noticed? Bondi asked, her voice steady but sharp. Kyle exhaled, rubbing his hands together. Not exactly, people noticed, but they looked the other way. He was careful, never took cash directly, never made a move without covering his tracks. But I saw things, case files disappearing, verdicts that made no sense, rulings that helped the same few people. Over and over again. Bondi studied him. Whistleblowers were rare, and the ones who made it this far, even rarer. Give me specifics, she said. Kyle nodded. Take the case of Daniel Reyes, a developer caught in a real estate scandal last year. He should have gone to prison for fraud. Millions of dollars. Pam. But Kinsey threw out key evidence, claimed it was mishandled. Next thing you know, Reyes walks free. That wasn't an accident. Bondi flipped to the section in the file that detailed Reyes's case. The judge's reasoning for dismissing evidence was shaky. At best outright corrupt, at worst. But that wasn't all. There were dozens of cases just like it. A corporate executive accused of insider trading. Charges dropped after a sudden lack of evidence. A powerful businessman with ties to offshore accounts. Case dismissed on a technicality. A known money launderer convicted by a jury. Kinsey overturned the verdict, citing improper jury instruction. It was a pattern. A pattern that led back to the judge and the money. It was coming from somewhere. Bondi looked up. What do you have on his finances? Kyle hesitated. That's where it gets tricky. His official records are clean. No major deposits, no sudden changes in lifestyle. But I found something: offshore accounts. Real estate holdings under different names. And he paused, his voice lower now. I think he's being protected. Bondi's eyes narrowed. By who? Cow shook his head. I don't know yet. But if you dig deep enough, you'll find the names. Pam Bondi leaned back in her chair. She had taken on corruption before. But this was big. This wasn't just about one man abusing his power. This was a system built to protect the guilty and silence anyone who got too close. Her gut told her one thing: if they were right, Judge Kinsey wouldn't go down quietly. But she wasn't afraid of a fight. And something told her this one was just getting started. Pam Bondi knew that exposing a corrupt judge wasn't just about proving guilt. It was about surviving the fight that came with it. She sat in her car, parked just a block away from the Hillsborough County Courthouse. The Florida heat pressed against the windows. But her focus was elsewhere. Inside that building. Judge Robert Kinsey carried on like any other day. His black robe shielding him from suspicion. Her phone buzzed Detective Mark Henshaw. She answered immediately. "Tell me you found something." His voice was low. "Cautious, Bondi. You not gonna like this. Try me." There was a pause. Kyle was right. Kinsey's got assets hidden under dummy corporations. We traced 3 separate shell companies back to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They all link back to cases he ruled on. Every single one of them benefiting a high-profile defendant. Bondi tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She had seen this kind of corruption before. Money moving through layers of fake entities, designed to keep the real players hidden. But Kinsey had been careful. Too careful. "This is enough to open an investigation," she said. "If we can tie one of those transactions directly to a verdict, we have him." Henshaw exhaled. "There's more." Bondi's stomach turned. "Go on." "One of our sources tipped us off that Kinsey knows he's being watched. He started moving money. He's getting ready to run." Bondi felt a flicker of satisfaction. The pressure was working. But that also meant something else. Kinsey wasn't going down without a fight. She hung up and grabbed her case file from the passenger seat. It was time to take the next step. Bondi strode through the courthouse lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floors. The building smelled like paper and old wood. Like a place where decisions were made. Lives changed. She had spent years in courtrooms just like this, watching the system work the way it was supposed to. But this time the system was the problem. Kyle was waiting for her outside Kinsey's courtroom, his eyes darting nervously toward the doors. "You really doing this?" he asked. Bondi nodded. "We don't have a choice." Inside, Judge Kinsey sat at the bench, presiding over an ongoing trial. His face was unreadable, the very image of control. But Bondi had seen enough to know the truth. She took a seat near the back, watching his every move. The trial continued. A simple contract dispute. But her mind was elsewhere. The way Kinsey spoke. The way he leaned forward when delivering a ruling. The way he feinted impartiality. It was all a performance. And she was about to tear it apart. As soon as the trial adjourned for recess, she made her move. "Your Honor," she called, striding toward the bench. "A moment of your time." Kinsey looked up, clearly irritated. "Miss Bondi, I wasn't aware you were part of these proceedings." "I'm not," she said. "But I believe you, and I have some unfinished business." The courtroom emptied out slowly. Attorneys gathering their files. Clerks moving between seats. But Bondi didn't budge. Kinsey sighed and stepped down from the bench, his voice dropping. "If you hear about that nonsense from your whistleblower, don't waste your breath. You have nothing." Bondi smiled. "We'll see about that." She handed him a manila folder. "Financial records, offshore accounts, corporate ties. You've been sloppy, Judge." Kinsey's expression didn't change. But Bondi saw a flicker of something behind his eyes. A crack in the mask. He opened the folder, scanning the pages inside. Then he closed it. "This means nothing." "Not yet," Bondi said. "But it will." She turned to walk away. But before she reached the door, Kinsey's voice stopped her. "You are making a mistake, Pam." She looked back over her shoulder. "No, Robert. You did, and now the whole world was about to find out." Pam Bondi had handled threats before. They came with the job. But the way Judge Robert Kinsey had said it, "You making a mistake, Pam," it wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. She walked out of the courtroom and into the humid Florida afternoon. pulling her phone from her pocket. She didn't hesitate, Detective Henshaw. I need you to meet me now. 30 minutes later. Bondi sat across from Henshaw in a small, dimly lit diner on the edge of town. The coffee was terrible. But they weren't here for the food. Henshaw placed a stack of papers between them. This is everything we pulled in the last 24 hours. Kinsey Shell Companies. They're connected to some very powerful people. Bondi flipped through the documents. Names she recognized: developers, CEOs, even politicians. Some of the biggest cases Kinsey had ruled on were nothing more than transactions. Verdicts for sale. He's not working alone, she muttered. Henshaw leaned in. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We're talking millions being funneled through offshore accounts, laundered through fake businesses. Some of these cases were supposed to put criminals away for life instead. Kinsey let them walk. Bondi clenched her jaw. A corrupt judge was one thing. A network protecting him was something else entirely. But there was something more pressing. You said he's moving money. She said, where? Henshaw hesitated. That's the problem. He's covering his tracks. Some of the offshore accounts were emptied in the last week. If he's planning to run, we don't have much time. Pam pushed the files aside. This case had just become bigger than she expected. Then we force his hand back in her office. Bondi called Kyle Donahue. He answered immediately. You were right. She said, it's not just Kinsey. He's part of something bigger. Kyle exhaled on the other end. I told you, and if you seen what I saw, you know how dangerous this is. Bondi leaned back in her chair. I need more, something that ties him directly to a bribe. Kyle hesitated. There's one thing. But it's risky. Bondi didn't blink. Go on. A former court clerk. Natalie Briggs. She worked in Kinsey's chambers for years. She left suddenly a few months ago. No one knows why, but I heard she had information on him. Pam's fingers drummed against her desk. Where is she now? Kyle lowered his voice. She's keeping a low profile. I don't think she wants to be found. Bondi's mind was already moving. If Natalie had worked closely with Kinsey, she knew things. Things that could blow this case wide open. I need an address, Kyle sighed. I'll see what I can do. But Bondi, be careful if she has proof. Kinsey isn't the only one who wanna keep her quiet. The address Kyle found led Bondi to a modest, single-story house on the outskirts of Tampa. The front yard was overgrown, the porch light flickering weakly. She knocked twice, no answer. She knocked again, louder. Natalie Briggs, my name is Pam Bondi. I need to talk to you. The door opened just a crack. A woman's face appeared, tired eyes. Weary expression. Go away. Bondi didn't move. I know you worked for Judge Kinsey. I know you left suddenly. I think I know why. Natalie's grip on the door tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Bondi said, her voice softer now. And I think you've been carrying this alone for too long. Natalie hesitated, then with a sigh, she opened the door. Come in. But if anyone asks, you were never here. And that's when Bondi knew. She was about to learn something that could change everything. The air inside Natalie Briggs' house was thick with unease. The blinds were drawn. The room dim except for a single lamp in the corner. Boxes set half-packed near the door, as if she were ready to leave at a moment's notice. Pam Bondi took a slow step inside, watching Natalie's every move. The woman was nervous, not just afraid, but hunted. Sit. Natalie said, motioning toward a worn-out couch. Say what you need to say, then leave. Bondi sat, placing her hands on her knees. keeping her voice steady. You worked for Judge Kinsey for years. You taught things you know things. Natalie let out a dry laugh. You think I don't know that? You think I don't wake up every day regretting what I saw and what I ignored? Pam leaned forward slightly. Then tell me what you know. Natalie folded her arms, exhaling sharply. I kept the books, the unofficial ones. The ones that never made it to the courthouse records. I saw the money coming in. Where it went, who benefited. I knew it was wrong, but when you're in it, when it's your livelihood, you tell yourself it's not your problem. Bondi didn't flinch. She had heard justifications before. But Natalie's voice cracked on the last word. And Bondi saw it, the weight she had been carrying. I wanted out, Natalie continued. I told Kinsey I was done, that I wouldn't be part of it anymore. And do you know what he did? Bondi waited. Natalie's voice dropped to a whisper. He smiled. He said, people who quit on me don't last long, Natalie. Think about that before you make a mistake. Bondi felt her stomach twist. And then Natalie wiped a hand across her face. A week later, my house was broken into. Nothing stolen, just trashed. My tires slashed, my cat disappeared. A message without words. Pam clenched her jaw. Kinsey wasn't just a corrupt judge. He was a bully who used fear to keep people in line. Natalie stood and disappeared into the next room. When she returns, she held a small flash drive between her fingers. This is what you're looking for, she said. Pam reached for it, but Natalie pulled back. Listen to me, if you take this, you need to finish what I started. You need to make sure this man never wears a robe again. Pam held her gaze. I promise. Work twice. Natalie hesitated. Then placed the drive in her hand. Everything's on their transactions. Case notes, conversations. Enough to bury him. Pam closed her fingers around it. Then that's exactly what I'll do. But as she walked toward the door, she had the unsettling feeling that Kinsey already knew she was coming for him. Pam Bondi sat in her office, staring at the flash drive in her hand. It was small, unremarkable. But the weight of what it contained was massive. Natalie Briggs had just handed her the key to exposing Judge Robert Kinsey. Proof, hard, irrefutable proof of his corruption. Offshore accounts, wire transfers, case notes, even transcripts of conversations that should have never existed. She plugged the drive into her laptop. The files opened. Instantly, rows of data filling the screen. And then she saw it. A transaction log dated 3 years ago. A name attached, Daniel Reyes, the real estate developer, who had walked free on fraud charges. The case Kinsey had dismissed on a technicality. Pam's pulse quickened. Another entry. Another name, Louis Carver, a hedge fund manager whose insider trading case had mysteriously collapsed in court. It was all here, every case Kinsey had touched, every payoff, every decision he had sold. Her mind raced. There was no way Kinsey had done this alone. Too many people had looked the other way. But right now she had one job: take him down. She grabbed her phone and dialed Detective Henshaw. I have what we need, she said, her voice steady. Meet me at the courthouse first thing tomorrow. Henshaw didn't hesitate. It's happening. It's happening the next morning. Bondi walked into the Hillsborough County Courthouse. Her every step measured. She knew Kinsey would see her. She wanted him to. She made her way through the corridors, past attorneys and clerks, who had no idea that within hours, everything was about to change. Inside Courtroom 3B, the case of State versus Simon Caldwell was underway. A corporate fraud case, another one. Kinsey would likely manipulate to protect the guilty. Pam took a seat near the front. Judge Kinsey sat at the bench, dressed in black robes, exuding the same calm authority he always had. If he felt the walls closing in, he didn't show it. The prosecutor was mid-sentence when Bondi stood. "Your Honor," she said loudly. Kinsey's head snapped up. "Miss Bondi, you are not counseling this matter. Sit down or I have urgent business before the court." She interrupted, pulling a thick file from her bag. The room fell silent. Kinsey's jaw tightened. "You are out of line." Bondi didn't move. "Robert Kinsey, you have violated the trust of this court, the people of Florida, and the very foundation of justice itself." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Kinsey's grip on his gavel tightened. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "Bailiff." But the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Detective Henshaw and 2 federal agents entered. Pam stepped forward, placing the flash drive on the clerk's desk. "This drive contains records of offshore accounts, illegal transactions in case tampering, spanning the last decade. Every ruling you made that was bought and paid for." Kinsey's face paled. "This is a baseless attack." "Your Honor," Henshaw said, stepping forward, "we have a warrant for your arrest." The room gasped. Pam watched as Kinsey's hands clenched into fists. His world was crumbling and he knew it. "You think this will hold up?" He spat, his voice low. "You think the system will turn on me?" Pam met his gaze. "It already has. The bail of." Step forward. The very courtroom Kinsey had ruled over for years was now against him. And as the cuffs locked around his wrists, Pam Bondi finally saw the truth in his eyes: fear. But she wasn't done yet. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Judge Robert Kinsey, a man who had wielded power over countless lives, now stood frozen as U.S. Marshals fastened the cold steel of handcuffs around his wrists. For a moment he didn't move, didn't speak. The silence stretched, the weight of his downfall pressing down on everyone in the room. Then slowly he turned his gaze toward Pam Bondi. "This is a mistake," he growled, his voice low, controlled, but Bondi heard what was beneath it: panic. She didn't flinch. "No, Robert. It's justice." The courtroom erupted. Attorneys, clerks, reporters. Everyone was either whispering in shock or watching in stunned silence as the once powerful judge was escorted from the bench he had ruled from for decades. As Kinsey passed, Bondi caught the flicker of something dark in his eyes. Not just anger or warning. "This isn't over." Bondi walked out of the courthouse into the blistering Florida sun. News vans lined the street, reporters scrambling for statements. She didn't stop, but before she could reach her car, Detective Henshaw fell into step beside her. "Well," he said, exhaling. That was something. Bondi kept walking. "It's not over." And Sean nodded. "You right. Kinsey's just the tip of this mess. The money trail, the connections. This goes way beyond him." Bondi stopped, turning to face him. "Then we don't stop here." Henshaw studied her for a moment. "You sure you're ready for that?" She thought about Natalie Briggs, about Kyle Donahue, about all the cases Kinsey had corrupted, all the people who had suffered because one man decided his power was worth more than their lives. She met Henshaw's gaze. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." 3 days later, Kinsey sat in an interrogation room at the Tampa Federal Detention Center. His suit was gone, replaced with a beige prison uniform. He looked smaller, now older. Pam Bondi stood on the other side of the glass watching. Henshaw approached his talking. She raised an eyebrow. The detective nodded. "Not everything, not yet." but enough to make some people nervous. Bondi crossed her arms. He's cutting a deal. Trying to Henshaw said names transactions. Backroom meetings. It's exactly what we thought. He wasn't just dirty, he was part of a machine. Bondi didn't look away. Then we tear it apart. Kinsey turned his head slightly, as if sensing her presence. Behind the glass for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one passing judgment. Corruption isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with sirens or flashing lights. Sometimes it hides behind the voice of a judge, the stroke of a pen, the weight of a gavel. But justice, real justice, finds a way through. Pam Bondi had seen the system fail. She had seen people manipulate the law for their own gain, but she had also seen what happens when the right people refuse to back down. And that's what brings the system back to life. Corruption thrives in silence. But silence is a choice. If you see something, if you know something, speak up. Because the truth, it always catches up.